2026, proved to be one of the most eventful days in recent memory. The Middle East edged toward a fragile ceasefire, while the war in Ukraine continued without pause, and a small Central European country found itself at the center of a geopolitical standoff. Here is a full breakdown of the day's key developments. Today in the Middle East will go down in history as the day when several states simultaneously declared themselves victors in the ongoing conflict. Iran declared victory. The United Arab Emirates declared victory. The United States of America declared victory. Virtually every other state in the Middle Eastern region saw fit to proclaim itself a triumphant winner. A natural question arises: if winners are everywhere, who then lost? According to the American president, nobody. There are simply no losers in this conflict, at least if one takes Washington's official rhetoric at face value. Trump announced a 2-week ceasefire, putting forward a single condition for its entry into force. The Strait of Hormuz must be opened immediately, fully, with a guarantee of safe passage for vessels of any nation. Within these 2 weeks, the US and Iran intend to hold negotiations and work out a final agreement on conflict resolution. It is critically important to understand precisely what Washington means by its victory. This is not about free transit through the Strait of Hormuz, not about territorial conquests, and not about the occupation of Iran. Operation Epic Fury pursued 3 specific strategic objectives from the very beginning: to destroy Iran's ballistic missile program, to eliminate Iran's nuclear program, and to achieve regime change. If one assesses the situation objectively, most of these goals have been accomplished. The regime in Iran has indeed changed. The country's ballistic potential has been significantly degraded. An enormous portion of the missile arsenal was expended during combat operations over the past month, as Iran launched massive strikes across the Middle Eastern region. As for the nuclear dossier, Trump announced the achievement of a fundamental agreement. Iran will renounce uranium enrichment. The specific mechanisms and details of this renunciation will be formalized during the upcoming negotiations. The Strait of Hormuz, open but not free. The situation with the Strait of Hormuz itself deserves particular attention. Today, Iran announced it is prepared to allow any vessels through, on the condition that the ceasefire regime is observed. However, passage will be paid. Tehran intends to charge a fee for navigation through the strait. Many rush to declare this a defeat for the US. However, such an interpretation is mistaken. Trump never promised to make passage through the Strait of Hormuz free of charge. His demand was framed in fundamentally different terms. The strait must be open to all on equal and fair conditions, whether American ships, Israeli, Emirati, Qatari, or Saudi. Equal access for all, that is what was meant, and that is precisely the condition Iran has, in essence, fulfilled. Moreover, the American side did not merely accept paid transit, but also floated the idea of creating a joint management structure. Some form of company that would oversee navigation through the strait and divide revenues from it between the United States, Iran, and presumably Oman, whose territory also borders the strait. This is a fundamentally different concept from what many had imagined. Iran's 10-point plan, ultimatum, or basis for bargaining. The world community has split into 2 camps. Some recognize the victory of the US and the defeat of Iran, others the opposite. This split is largely connected to how one specific phrase from Trump was perceived. The American president mentioned that the Iranian side had handed him a 10-point settlement plan and that the United States was prepared to consider it as a basis for negotiations. Many heard in this an unconditional agreement by Washington to all Iranian demands and a de facto American capitulation. Meanwhile, the Iranian side soon published the full text of their plan, and it deserves detailed examination. Point 1. The United States permanently renounces any military aggression against Iran in the future. Point 2. Iran retains sovereign control over the Strait of Hormuz. Point 3. Iran has the right to enrich uranium. Point 4. The lifting of all primary sanctions against the country. Point 5. The lifting of all secondary sanctions. Point 6. The cancellation of all UN Security Council resolutions directed against Iran. Point 7, perhaps the most telling, the payment of compensation to Iran, essentially reparations from the United States. Point 8, the complete withdrawal of American military units from the entire Middle Eastern region. Point 9. The immediate cessation of all hostilities, including operations on Lebanese territory. Point 10 concerns other conditions for normalization. If one looks at this document soberly, what we have before us is not a peace plan and not a basis for negotiations. It is a demand for capitulation. Each of the 10 points, if accepted, would mean the complete and unconditional defeat of the United States. Trump, however, conveyed something entirely different. All these points will be subject to detailed discussion at negotiations to be held in Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan. Only upon their conclusion will a decision be made on the final configuration of any agreement. Another detail is worth noting. It appears that nobody in the American leadership carefully read this document in the first place. What mattered was the bare fact: Iran made a formal step forward and signaled readiness for dialogue. And that proved sufficient for Washington to announce the launch of a negotiating process and de facto exit from direct military confrontation. It is equally noteworthy that in Iran itself, no one apparently expected their plan to be accepted as a basis for negotiations at all. Iranian diplomats in various embassies spent the entire day commenting on the situation with undisguised irony. America's real victory or exit from the conflict? If one looks at what is happening without illusions, a key conclusion can be formulated. The United States did not so much defeat Iran in the classical sense of the word as it organized a structured exit from direct military involvement in the conflict, having first accomplished its own objectives. Washington achieved what it set out to achieve when it launched the operation. Iran's ballistic program has been degraded, its nuclear program frozen by agreement, the regime changed, and the Strait of Hormuz opened to all on equal terms. Confirming this conclusion are two important statements made by the American side today. The first, Iran will not enrich uranium. The second, and perhaps even more significant, any state that supplies weapons to Iran will automatically be subject to 50% trade tariffs. This statement speaks volumes. Such measures are not introduced on the assumption that a conflict has completely ended. They are introduced precisely when the continuation of a confrontation is being planned, but now without direct American military participation. America's logic is quite transparent. Washington will supply weapons to all states continuing their confrontation with Iran: Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Israel, but it will not fight itself, and anyone who dares to arm Iran, China, India, Russia, will face 50% tariffs. This is not the end of the conflict, it is the outsourcing of it. Israel does not stop. While diplomats were exchanging statements about the ceasefire, reality on the ground looked fundamentally different. Israel gave an entirely unambiguous answer to the question of whether it is among those observing the ceasefire. No, the Prime Minister's cabinet stated directly that operations in southern Lebanon do not fall under the 2-week ceasefire regime and will continue in full. Officially, Netanyahu expressed support for Washington's position, publishing corresponding statements through his official accounts. In practice, however, his cabinet made unmistakably clear that the country is not yet ready to reach any agreement with those with whom Israel has unresolved scores to settle. The message is directed simultaneously at Iran and at Trump himself. The strategic objective of the Israeli military on the Lebanese front is to reach the Litani River, which is intended to become the northern boundary of the buffer zone being created. As of today, by the end of April 8th, this task has been accomplished to approximately 15%. At current rates of advance, completing the operation will require no less than 4 to 6 months. This is precisely what drives Israel's key strategic interest in maintaining tension in the Persian Gulf. As long as Iran is drawn into confrontation with the Arabian monarchies, it cannot concentrate its efforts against Israel. Normalization of relations between Tehran and the Gulf states would free Iran's hands and direct its attention precisely where Israel would least want it. For this reason, a ceasefire between Iran and the Gulf states is categorically not in Tel Aviv's interest at this moment. It is in this context that today's strikes must be understood. From early morning, the Israeli defense minister reported that one of the most powerful strikes since the beginning of the entire Middle Eastern conflict had been delivered against Lebanon. According to available data, approximately 100 targets on the territory of Beirut and other parts of the country came under attack. The scale of destruction is enormous. This is not merely a military operation, it is an unambiguous political signal. Israel has no intention of halting combat operations under any pretext, and no American-Iranian ceasefire will stop it. In the Persian Gulf. Peace in words, war in deeds. Parallel to the Lebanese events, information emerged about a strike on Lavan Island in the Persian Gulf. This island hosts Iranian oil terminals that account for a significant share of Iranian oil exports. According to available information, the strike was not carried out by the American-led coalition. Sources indicate the attack was conducted by the United Arab Emirates acting independently. In response, Iranian strikes followed against the UAE itself, Bahrain, Qatar, and reportedly Kuwait. All of this eloquently testifies to the real state of affairs. Despite the solemn declarations of a ceasefire, combat operations in the region did not pause for a single hour. Words of peace were spoken in one place, the war continued in another. Oil markets, a collapse in prices. Financial markets reacted to the ceasefire news swiftly and sharply. The price of WTI crude oil collapsed by approximately $20 per barrel over just a few hours, a drop of roughly 15 to 20% from the level of the previous evening. And yet just the day before, Trump in his public statements had warned that the situation was so critical that an entire civilization could be under threat. The contrast between yesterday's rhetoric and today's oil prices speaks for itself. Can peace be believed? To be honest, believing in a genuine resolution of the conflict is not possible. Everything we are observing today resembles an operational pause, a temporary respite and regrouping before the next round, rather than the genuine establishment of peace. Too many states in the region have an interest in continuing the escalation. Too many questions remain unresolved. Too obvious is the gap between the words and actions of all participants. Hungary, a small country with an outsized influence. Turning to the Ukrainian storyline, it is necessary to first pause on an event that today is effectively determining its further development. And that event is taking place not in Ukraine, but in Hungary, where parliamentary elections are being held this weekend. At first glance, it may seem strange that the results of elections in a small Central European country should determine the fate of significantly larger geopolitical processes. Yet that is precisely the situation. Viktor Orban remains the only politician in the European Union consistently blocking the extension of a €90 billion credit to Ukraine, funds that are critically important for maintaining the combat capability of the Ukrainian armed forces. The situation is taking on a truly unprecedented character. Both Russia and the United States of America simultaneously desire Orban's re-election. This is perhaps one of the rare moments in contemporary history when the interests of Moscow and Washington coincide so openly and explicitly. In support of Orban, US Vice President J.D. Vance made a special trip to Hungary, publicly calling the Hungarian leader the finest man around and urging citizens to vote for him. Trump also openly expresses his support for Orban. Ukraine and the European Union, for their part, are making every effort to prevent the Hungarian premier's re-election. A confrontation no less fierce than on the front line is unfolding on this front. The coming weekend promises to be politically heated in Hungary, and its outcome will largely determine whether Ukraine receives the critically necessary financing. Ukraine overnight strikes. During the night of April 8th, both sides of the conflict delivered massive strikes against each other's infrastructure and energy facilities. The Ukrainian side concentrated efforts on the southern direction, operating primarily from the Black Sea. Naval drones, sea surface drones, were active across the water, attacking ships, logistics facilities, and coastal infrastructure along the Crimean Peninsula. The Russian side undertook efforts at anti-maritime defense. Corresponding video materials appeared in open sources throughout the day. According to available information, one or more civilian cargo vessels traveling across the Black Sea were struck. The most resonant strike from the Ukrainian side was the attack on a fuel depot in Feodosia. Initially, satellite imagery showing thermal anomalies and photographs of large-scale fires at the site circulated in open sources. Somewhat later, Ukrainian sources published objective control footage confirming hits on the fuel depot. Additionally, strikes were recorded near Luhansk and Melitopol. At the same time, the overall intensity of strikes by the Ukrainian armed forces has noticeably declined over the past several days. The reasons for this are difficult to determine unambiguously at this stage. It may be a consequence of increased effectiveness of Russian countermeasures. Alternatively, Ukrainian drone stockpiles may have been significantly reduced as a result of intensive operations in February and March. Russian strikes, 176 drones against northern Ukraine. The Russian side deployed 176 drones during the night of April 8th. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense confirmed this from the early morning hours. It is characteristic that, for several days running now, the main concentration of Russian strikes has been falling on the northern and northeastern regions of Ukraine. Chernihiv Oblast, Sumy Oblast, and partially Kharkiv and Poltava Oblasts. Among the documented strikes, an attack on railway infrastructure in Romny, a strike on a truck parking area near Mina. Reportedly, these trucks were used to transport spare parts and components for drones. Strikes were also recorded against several electrical substations near the settlement of Volnoye and against a 110 kV substation near Aktyrka. A gas distribution station near Kachayevka was also struck. The most powerful strike hit Merefa, a suburb of Kharkiv. There, a reinforced concrete structure plant was attacked, on the territory of which fuel was stored. Nighttime footage captured large-scale fires on the horizon, subsequently confirmed by objective control imagery. The logic behind this concentration of strikes in precisely this region is quite transparent. It is from northern and northeastern Ukraine that the Ukrainian side launches hundreds of drones deep into Russian territory. It is here, apparently, that the main fuel storage depots, logistics hubs, and technical support points for drone operations are located. The Russian military is striving to destroy all of this infrastructure: fuel depots, railway traction substations, trucks carrying spare parts, in order to deprive the opposing side of the ability to bring up and refuel drones near the border before their launch. The front line, no significant changes. Over the past 24 hours, no noteworthy changes to the front line were recorded. There are virtually no cartographic adjustments, only geolocations of individual engagements that provide a general sense of what is happening on particular directions. On the Zaporizhzhia sector, the area around Vozdvizhenka is drawing analysts' attention. High-intensity use of FPV drones is being recorded on the southeastern outskirts of the settlement. This is typically a sign of either an assault already underway or immediate preparations for one. A number of cartographers have extended the grey zone to the southeastern edges of Vozdvizhenka, allowing for the possibility of Russian units being present on this line. According to data from the Eastern Military Group and assessments of several analysts, Vozdvizhenka and the neighboring settlement of Verkhnya Tersa may come under full Russian control in the near future. On the Dobrovolsk sector, pro-Ukrainian resources are recording the advance of Russian units from Pokrovsk in a northwesterly direction. On the Kostiantynivka sector, information is coming in about fighting near Ilinivka and Dolha Balka, though there are no changes on the map yet. Additionally, the Russian side is conducting stabilization measures west of Chasiv Yar. To recall, during March, the Ukrainian side carried out a series of counterstrikes here, as a result of which the grey zone was expanded in the direction of the city itself. Russian units are now seeking to eliminate these changes and restore the previous front configuration. On the Sloviansk sector, strikes against Ukrainian armed forces positions are being recorded, along with active efforts to identify FPV drone operators. There are no changes to the front line. On all northern directions, the front line has virtually frozen. The sides are apparently conducting regrouping operations. This may be connected to the uncertainty in the Middle East. It may also reflect the anticipation of Hungarian election results, on which the further configuration of assistance to Ukraine depends. In any case, no active dynamics are being observed here at present.